What do you do when your brand is trending for all the wrong reasons? Welcome to a special edition of Media Dialogues with Storyboard 18, part of our ongoing Crisis Counsel series, where we explore how brands can navigate reputational risks, public scrutiny, and shifting consumer expectations in real time. In today's hyper-connected world, when a crisis hits, there's no pause button. Social media has turned brand missteps, big or small, into public reckonings. The rules of engagement between brands and consumers are being rewritten as we speak. Joining us to unpack this high-stakes, high-visibility new reality are two leading voices from the world of brand strategy and communications. Lloyd Mathias, business strategist and investor, brings deep insights from years of shaping businesses and brand narratives at top companies. And Archana Jain, founder and CEO of PR Pundit Havas Red, shares her expertise in building, protecting, and evolving reputations in a time of radical transparency. I'm Delshad Irani, and let's get straight into it. Archana, I want to ask you first, we want to begin with the very definition of brand crisis, how that has changed. We know social media has appended a lot of things, and one is how we define a brand crisis today. So let me begin with that. How do you see the very definition of brand crisis changing and evolving?
Well, let's look at it. How do we define a crisis? When somebody is to blame and somebody finds out, right? And where did they find this earlier? It was in print media. That's no longer this. The center stage today is sitting on social. That's where you get your news and your views. So, and also by and by, consumers are becoming the voices. They are the ones who are putting out news. We've always warned our clients, saying, okay, if you're not going to talk about it, somebody who's getting out of the gate in a plant is going to snitch on you, will tell you the whole story. So that, if that is changing, also consumers are becoming more woke, right? So they want to say, is this company standing with us? Or is it merely trying to sell to us? So if that is, then where is reputation sitting? I think reputation today is sitting not by what the brand is saying to us. It's about what people are sharing about the brand. I think that is the change that we've seen in landscape. Earlier, it was a little bit more controlled.
Yes.
Today, it is very decentralized, and brands need to recognize that. That only if there is a dialogue, they have a say in it and participate in that.
What is that definition of a crisis? How have you seen it evolve, given all your time with major brands shaping those narratives and businesses? How have you seen the definition of a crisis evolve for a company? It could be in any sector.
Sure. I would say two things. One, like Archana rightly pointed out, is that crises are far more prevalent now because everyone's a spokesperson. Everyone's, media in his own right. And therefore, you never know when the next big problems come in. As compared to, let's say, even a couple of decades ago, and I would say it largely in the early days of pre-social media, there were few and far between, right? I lived to one through in 2002, the pesticide crisis that happened to the cola companies. This was a serious report done by a well-regarded NGO on environmental protection, and it hit the front page of the papers. And, obviously for a few months, things went completely haywire, and we had to really work through it. But it was still a single source crisis that was identifiable. The company had a crisis committee put together, worked through it. It took its while. Today, I think what we have is a lot of micro elements. You never know, right? It could be a customer service issue. It could be somebody finding your communication a little over the top. It could be a fringe group taking umbrage to, something that a distributor of yours did in a strange part of the country. If you're a multinational, it could be someone feeling offended by what your global headquarters country has done in other contexts. So I think it could come from anywhere. And more importantly, I think it's also that they could explode in no time. So, what hits someone at 11 o'clock in the morning, by 3 in the afternoon could be raging on social media, and by 5 in the evening could possibly mean street protests. So I think the time between when a crisis hits is picked up and before you start reacting, I think that has collapsed quite dramatically. And therefore, I do believe that corporates and agencies struggle to keep pace with it. Earlier, it was slightly more tempered, and therefore you could work through a strategy. I think now it's happening real time. And I think that's where companies are not as well prepared and therefore struggle a bit.
Yeah, I'd like to add that, yeah, absolutely. That's very, very true. The agility that it requires from brands and companies has really been fast forward. Because there's no way that you always on, and we all know crisis doesn't come by an appointment night. You can't schedule it.
Hit you at any time.
It hits you in the sort of late in the evening when there's no resources available at that point of time, maybe in the office or otherwise.
Absolutely. So it's interesting because while we're talking about how that time has collapsed from the time a crisis hits to your response time and all of that, but at the same time, even a crisis can collapse as quickly. Can die down within a day, depending, of course, on the scale and the gravity of it. But we'll get to sort of the mechanics of it. But let me talk about what it takes to build crisis readiness. We talk about sort of response teams, and social media, of course, is one aspect of it. It's across the stakeholder chain. What are you seeing? How are you seeing organizations adapting to this agility? Are they doing enough? Is there any sort of a frame, a guidebook or something of that sort, a playbook for people to react to crisis in situations like we're seeing? And we're seeing a lot of these happening. We're talking about the volume of crisis. It can come from anywhere. The sources are thousands, if not millions. So Archana, what are you seeing? How are you seeing brands building crisis readiness in their organizations?
To be honest, not enough vulnerability risks analysis are being undertaken. And I could say that about certainly a lot of the startup organizations. It's not happening. They don't have a manual. The legacy organizations are prepared, or at least have been prepared for over the years. I don't know how,
living through example
I don't know how often they are refreshing it. But when I started my career 34 years ago or whatever, we used to dip into international manuals of global companies that we were representing. Today, it's like you ask an organization and say you want to do it, and they say, well, what would it cost? Because I said it's going to cost a certain amount of time and effort, etc. Oh, we'll think about it. So they're not investing enough. They're not thinking. They're not preparing their teams. And you need a ready team. That the team is not going to go into a panic.
Right.
A situation's happened. What do we do? They don't know who to turn to. There isn't a lawyer on call. There isn't any. They haven't thought that internal communications is required. And how does an MNC executive change? Why should they read about it in the newspaper next morning? They should be told, communicated first. These are very simple issues, which if you had a crisis communication team, or you would have trained them, you would have thought of, these are where my organization could possibly be slightly vulnerable. These could be holding statements that I could do to buy time.
Yes.
Right? Because when a crisis hits, you need to sort of first is mobilize. So what do you mobilize? Then you stabilize, and then you strategize. Now where is the mobilization? You don't know what to do. You don't have any way of stabilizing the situation. And that is what the manual contained. It had ready references. Let's say if I had a fire, I knew I needed to reach out maybe beyond an ambulance and beyond a fire brigade to maybe the local SHO. It had that.
Right.
It had a ready reference for somebody to just say, okay, my plant manager's not there, my administration manager's on leave, this is a number I could call. It's a red book that is gone missing in a lot of organizations.
And it's bizarre and it's strange because we just spoke about how the number of exposure points has exponentially increased, Lloyd. It's really strange that, whether it's legacy or startup brands, we're still fumbling on that aspect. That red book, like you said, that manual still is maybe missing or isn't updated. Why is that, Lloyd? Especially given, you speak to a lot of startups, you work with a lot of them, you mentor people, founders, and you talk to these teams. Why aren't they thinking about this more proactively? Because it could happen to anybody. And we've seen that, whether it's Q-commerce, videos of, dark stores and the state of dark stores, or what we saw recently with, with Air India and the disastrous crash and the response that came after, which was also criticized. And we're seeing all these examples, and we're seeing the damage it can do to brand reputation, business, just long-term perception. So tell me why are we still lacking on this front?
So I'd say two things. I'd say the more established companies have sort of worked a protocol, and much like Archana said, you first kind of mobilize, stabilize, and then move forward. I think a lot of them have got started with listening tools. How do you pick up the early stages of the crisis? The sooner you get to know of it, the quicker your firefighting work. I'd certainly agree that a lot of startups tend to ignore it in their hierarchy of growth and customer acquisition. Somehow this falls a little well down in the priorities, and therefore are often caught flat-footed. But I'd say more than just the ability of organizations, big and small, to react to crisis or get ready for the crisis, is that the pace and speed is so dramatic that they're barely able to keep pace. I think the reality is that everyone's yet to come to terms with the fact that you can have a crisis coming out of anywhere, anytime, and any place. And two, it isn't right now still right up on the company's topmost agenda like it should be. And there I would say the larger companies have woken up to it. If you look at, let's say, listed entities, they have a risk management committee. Now, risk management committee till even 5 years ago, I'd say pre the pandemic, was largely financial risk. The slightly more advanced companies looked at cyber security risk, right? What happens if our computers get hacked or our data is leaked? I think only now they've woken up to the fact that risk could be social media. I mean, an employee, in his personal social media handle, where he proudly says, I work for XYZ Corporation, goes and says something that's politically volatile. And then suddenly there you have it. So I think we haven't really recognized that risk is now not just financial, or cyber. It just could be reputation risk and could arise from anywhere. And therefore, linked to that, and larger companies are right now, kind of waking up to it, is that it not only affects your company's morale, reputation, it affects the market capitalization. One bad hit, and you're talking of wiping off millions of market capitalization carefully built over years of quarterly profits and revenues and all the rest of it. I think, therefore, larger companies are now taking this seriously. It's a big part of a risk management committee's discussions. I think startups have some way to go, and I'd admit completely, I mean, it's just low in their priorities, but they have to wake up to it.
But Lloyd, correct me if I'm wrong, they've got a business resumption plan. They're taking care of risk to the extent that their business doesn't get crippled in terms of supply chain, what is our backup, on all those parameters. But on the communication side, there is a gap. And that is what I think, to the extent that, how will it impact my customers? How will they lose confidence in my brand? That bit, I don't think has been thought through
absolutely.
as it ought to be in this era of, a very active digital community.
So great point Archana makes. I just want to add a point. I think you're absolutely right about that. But a few corporations, and I'd say largely consumer-led corporations, besides having a crisis management committee to actually look at potential risk and crisis that's coming in, they also have a plan where they have a bunch of loyalists and influencers who can kickstart in short time.
Absolutely.
Right? So the moment things are going a little haywire, besides what they put out, to the best of a company, but a company's point of view in a crisis is always discounted to the extent that it's the official spokesperson. But the moment you have credible third-party influencers who are not your brand ambassadors, that helps. And I know companies that have a bunch of well-regarded allies who kick in at the right time.
On standby.
On standby.
On standby. How does that work, Archana? How do you, and this was one of the questions I wanted to ask you, given, the rise of influencer marketing, and everyone fancies themselves an influencer these days, and in some ways we are, right?
You are the key opinion leader. That's how we classify
leader, right?
people like yourselves.
But it's interesting what Lloyd said, because when you have that kind of sort of surge of negativity around your brand and the chatter around it, you counter it with, positive speak. And it comes from, in a sense, allies that you've embedded or you have on a roll. When does that kick in? How does that kick in? Are people building these armies of allies to prepare for, it could be anything. It could come from anywhere.
I classify public relations as, reputational PR, right? It's an insurance against disaster. So the more people know about your brand, the more favorable they will be. So if they know about the quality and the processes that you anywhere are deeply embedded in your systems, then they're not going to question it. Let's look at Maggie. When it happened, Nestle was a very close company at that point of time in India. Mr. Narayanan was brought in to kind of open the doors to communication. Why? Because they understood that the company's processes and quality and rigor needs to be understood better. But similarly, so they launched something called Mary Maggie or something. I remember that, some sort of campaign to sort of get the consumer love flowing back in. So that's how companies now, you say, okay, I have these advocates. They work with us. So whether we do collaborations with them or they are just privy to our fine products, they know us, they understand us. So can we call on them when there is an issue? And we've done it. Well, campaign went wrong. There was a, cultural infringement on color and things like that. So we had to call up the people that we worked with closely and say, hey, guys, can you help us support this? And they all jumped in because it was years and years of good working relationship that they did it. And they did it because we were able to present a rationale. But on the other hand, if you don't have let's say, a credible argument to support what has gone wrong, they're not going to support you. They don't want to put themselves to risk.
And their credibility on the line.
At least anybody with certain equity is not going to campaign. They're going to say, I'm not going to jeopardize my name, because then I get called out as being, I will sell my soul for anything. And that's not a real content creator either. They say, well, we'll support you and give us a... So that, again, the PR machinery or the crisis communication teams in organizations have to come up with. Let's look at the astronomer case. Gwyneth Paltrow's case was that campaign came out at the strategize phase.
Right.
At stability, it must have been, hey, Byron, you better resign or we will terminate you, or whatever. Some conversations like that would have transpired. So that's the kind of thing. Then who thinks of that campaign? Who is going to be the mouthpiece?
In this case, it was also an external agency that was brought on board, right, for that.
You need partners. You need capable partners, whether it's on social media or advertising or PR. Many times, a full-page advertisement is the answer. And it could be Cadbury's, right? Amitabh Bachchan was bought in. Big campaign. So you need all collective forces. It's not just... Absolutely. And that's why a crisis communication team is very essential. So the communication protocols are defined, the roles are defined, and there is not... The CEO, the managing director, is not solving for the problem all alone. He has all counsel available at a...
When it comes to the face of a company, the leadership, Lloyd, how are people thinking about it versus how they were perhaps thinking about it earlier? CEOs today, founders today, founders are out there all the time, whether it's on LinkedIn or whether giving statements, and they're not shying away from doing that. personal views being put out there, right? And they are pretty much talking on behalf of the companies as well. So there's this blending of personal identity and brand and company identity, and then in that mix you have a crisis. What happens? What's happening? What are leaders? What are executives thinking about right now?
I'd say that typically in any serious crisis, it's good to have the head of the organization, the founder, the CEO, the MD, whatever you call him, to stand up and be the face of the company. And I think, just in terms of sheer protocol, I think one is an acceptance that something has happened. Second is being absolutely transparent that we recognize that there has been a mishap, there has been a problem. And third is outlining a clear course of action. A, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to make good? How are we going to ensure this won't happen again? I think that protocol, if the CEO stands up and says upfront, is a good way. Everything else, getting the ambassadors, getting the allies, getting the senior executives using their social media, getting an army of social media experts to kind of push the narrative comes next. But I think the clarity of standing up and being counted, owning up, accountability, and assuring people that if something really wrong happened, there was a mistake and therefore we're going to work it through. I know it's easier said than done. I recognize that a lot of companies are a little wary of standing up and being counted and owning up because of the legal ramifications. So that is a problem. You're the legal person in the crisis committee who's saying, hey, if we own up to this might open up lawsuits, and I recognize that. But I think purely in terms of a human-related crisis, I think when the CEO owns up, I think things tend to dissipate. A little bit of the temperature in the room comes down. And I see very often companies that push that out, that tends to make it a little sticky. And I do believe it's an area that needs to be addressed. I do recognize there's a legal challenge, but often I believe the best way forward is a bit of owning up and saying, here's how we're going to clean up the mess.
No, I think leadership visibility is absolutely imperative in cases of at least high profile or let's say significant crises. The only time that, we would defer to saying, okay, let's not expose the leader is when there may be some cultural nuance and you say, okay, it's an expat leader and his communication skills may not be, or it could be misinterpreted. Can we put the chief operating officer in place who's maybe local? So there are some nuances like that. But yes, important, like Lloyd says, to look at empathy, accountability.
Clarity.
You have to take accountable that we did what we did in the circumstances and we followed the protocol and what we promised to do as an action to make good is something that has to come from the senior most leader, whoever it be. Chief operating officer, CEO.
You find the right voice for that situation. It's fluid. It's, of course,
Gwyneth
you have to...
Paltrow is an example, right? You don't have a CEO, what do you do? So you find that. But nevertheless, it has to be relatable and something that is able to sort of communicate what the brand is trying to do.
But I want to sort of just pick on a couple of things that both of y'all have said. One is on transparency and what does real transparency look like? Where is that line between being open and oversharing, which also then makes me wonder how much can you promise, how much can you take accountability for, right? You go up there and you say this will never happen again, and it happens again. So you're not just thinking about in that moment, in that crisis, but you have to think 10 steps ahead. So first part, between being open and oversharing, what's the balance? Where do you draw the line? Whoever wants to take it first.
I'd say two things. I think one, it's important to be open. I think it's important to make sure that whatever you do keeps the core target audience, who's your core target base. You can't be all things to everyone, right? So brands that tend to overpromise and say, okay, we're going to sort this issue and that, whatever, will tend to get nowhere. I think very clear. I also think that companies that, and these days, a lot of crises are springing from companies who are standing up for a social cause they believe is relevant to their audience. Now, what seems like a justified social cause to one part of the audience may seem for another fringe element completely over the top, right? There are problems. And therefore, backing up and saying, sorry, we're not about this is not the best way. So one has to be able to stand up to it, to stick by it. Of course, I understand the ramifications when your stores are being burnt and things would have to change a bit. But I think, therefore, there's an ability of saying that this is what the brand stands for. I'd qualify it with one example, which I thought was rather well handled. Zomato faced a bit of a crisis when, someone somewhere turned down a delivery person saying he belongs to a religion. Why is he bringing my veg food? Right? And I think there was a crisis and there was a problem, and it kind of hit the news headlines and, was big on social media. And Dipinder rightly came out with a tweet saying, food has no religion, right? And I think it went down well. It kind of calmed tempers a bit. But he fundamentally said that, I recognize the fact, but hey, we're not going to discriminate between which delivery person goes into which neighborhood and what food he carries along. And I think most people bought the logic. I mean, there were still people who were upset about it. So I think the ability to stand up and say, this is what my brand stands for, and I'm not here because, I cater to only one religion or the other. I think, the long-term sense prevails. So I think one has to be able to, be transparent, but at the same time stand one's ground.
I think sometimes the organization culture comes into play.
Sure.
In these circumstances, not just the product or the service that you are supporting. And I do this from, again, because we were talking startups versus legacy organization. Now, legacy organizations have a structure. They can't move. They need so many clearances that it becomes very difficult for their chief executive to go onto LinkedIn and kind of make a statement. That's okay for Mama Earth Ghazala to get out there and say, okay, defend the fact that her products do have, and she will fix the natural claims, etc. But now let's imagine, Hindustan Lever, they just kind of introduced a new CEO. Economic Times went after them and asked them, why? We asked you and you denied it. Why? Now,
they called out the comms team.
They called it out that the comms team was not thinking. Now, I'm just putting myself in their shoes and saying, I don't have the approval to share it. Maybe the MCA needs to be informed. Maybe the board may somewhere. My internal employees need to be involved. How can I say yes to them? So yes, there are other ways to deal with it, but nevertheless, these are constraints around which companies have to work with. So culture of the organization determines to the level of transparency that you can share and what you can share and when you can share it.
Having said which, I'm going to play contrarian here. I would still say that for an average consumer of a product, it doesn't matter that Ghazala from Mama Earth is going out within 5 minutes of a crisis, but Jagrut Koticha of PepsiCo is going out a day later. For him, it's the same thing. There's a problem with your product. I want the CEO to go up there on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever and say his piece. So I think the consumer is not so discriminating. I understand fully well the protocols of a large global organization, going through various levels of hierarchy and headquarters and all the rest of it. But hey, I'm a consumer. I find a bug in my soft drink. I mean, I want immediate redressal.
Yeah, but it's not about who said it, but it's also the timing.
Sure.
Right? So a legacy organization will take maybe a day, 24 hours. We don't have the patience.
Absolutely.
You sit in the plane seat and the flight is delayed, and look at the amount of chaos there is on X. Does Indigo react to it? No, you just wait it out. Right? That's a strategy.
Thing, right?
That's strategy to say, wait it out. Guys, this is temporary. You watch it. You've got to watch the curve. And that's why social listening that you bottom out is very integral. Is it, at what pace is the anger or is the consumer getting worked up? Is that increasing, or is it just a few? Every social media comment doesn't require a response.
Absolutely.
No, not at all.
Imagine that if it did.
Exactly.
And the other part is, therefore, a lot of these little mini crises and these little, kind of people getting agitated also are very ephemeral, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, the next news cycle and it's gone.
Yes.
So if you have the ability to wait it out and lie low for a while, a lot of these issues just blow over. At least the social media one just blow over.
Exactly. Cricket results will sort you out.
No, but that's the thing, right? We spoke about the very definition of crisis changing in terms of even the scale of this crisis, but the kind of crisis also. Not every comment or not every tweet requires a crisis response, right? You just serve the customer, deal with their issues, and you're done with it. But bringing to that same point about identifying crisis, knowing when to respond, how are people, getting used to that? What are teams doing? What are companies doing, Archana? How are they deciding what to respond to, what not to respond to? You said watching the curve, for instance, right? You don't know. You don't know when that curve will turn, who's going to stoke the fire. After a point, can you prepare, at all?
See, it's like a pilot, right? When they get into a simulator, they learn the ropes of how to sort of take a plane through maybe some turbulence. But every turbulence that they actually experience when they're actually flying is very different. So they have to think about the various elements, balance that off, and then continue. So that's exactly what crisis communication training does. It just enables you to develop a way of thinking. And I think not enough of that is ready. You need to develop, all of us need to understand, okay, in a studio, what could go wrong? In the news media, what could go wrong? What could you be alleged? And how is it that you, as an organization, were going to react to it? If that is, then you will find the answers in your response, because you will say, oh, I need to scan media. I need to activate the fact that somebody's looking at X, somebody's looking at Facebook, somebody's looking at Instagram, somebody's looking at the news media where it's happening, and see, who is it? Who do I need to call in to say, hey, listen, this is this, could I? So you...
Platform-specific responses.
It could be platform-specific, it could be generic. Putting it up on your handle, because that's the easiest way that everybody, because they will refer to that. So many times it's not there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So those are the kind of things that it prepares you to do it.
And if I could add, I'd say one more thing. I think in this era of social media, I think businesses and brands are effectively walking on glass. And therefore, the reality is, I think, to look at every bit of communication, every new product launch, everything you do with a kind of magnifying glass to see, is there cause for offense? Having said which, I'm not saying that a brand does not have to be offensive. Sometimes you will take a stand, but at least try and understand the ramifications, all that you put out. The other point, and companies are still struggling with it, is also recognizing that every one of your employees willy-nilly is a spokesperson, because he all has social media. He all has, and people logically and very often put their company names. I'm XYZ at XYZ Corporation.
You want them to also.
Very often you want them to.
Because for employer branding, you say, well, you identify yourself.
And then how do you counsel an average management trainee that if you're going to say something about a political party, about a religion, that may not be good enough? So I think a little bit of kind of looking at the landscape, figuring out what's permissible, what's not, basic guidelines to employees in terms of what you will or will not post about. And if you are feeling strongly political, I know organizations recognize that, create a parallel social handle taking your organization's name off. But as an organizational person, you may not be a spokesperson. Everything you say is going to be measured up against it. You've seen lots of crises where someone said something pretty nasty on X, and people cross-refer and say, oh, LinkedIn, and he works for XYZ Corporation, let's cancel. Right? Cancel culture is real. So I think the recognition that it can come from anywhere, and therefore recognizing that corporations and businesses are walking in this little tightrope and could go wrong anytime. I think you need to scan on this and then, like you said, work out counterbalancing measures.
Aviation, of course, right now we are seeing a lot of negative news around different things. SpiceJet has been, has had issues with customer service.
Been to the receiving end.
Yes, a lot. But in live example, what are your thoughts on how it can be handled and should be?
I think what happened was unfortunate. I think, clearly what's playing out is about an army man, beating up a couple of SpiceJet counter executives because of baggage issues. I think one is important for SpiceJet to come out saying this is what happened to the best of our knowledge. I think the second is very clearly saying that they have, put this whole thing in front of law enforcement authorities, the police and the Jammu and Kashmir police, or who was investigating that. I think the other is again to reach out to the army authorities to check on the entire issue. I know it makes for great video now that everything is videographed and
there are different angles and different videos coming out, different sides of the story.
Yeah, I think it's important to come out, explain one's point of view, saying this is what happened, and to this extent try and stabilize it. There are no answers right now. We don't know the real situation. But I think it's about the fact that the airline already being on the receiving end. All airlines today are in some way the receiving end. I think there's also a credibility that crisis in a larger sense that SpiceJet has to address. But I think the importance is someone coming up as a spokesperson and talking. Just having your social media put out clarifications doesn't cut it.
Absolutely.
I think that is a serious issue. On the other hand, I also recognize that the Army is a well-respected institution. I think someone senior up within the battalion that where this Lieutenant Colonel was involved has to also come up and kind of say that, you know, we are investigating this issue, and appropriate action will be taken if it needs to be taken.
Absolutely. Archana, any thoughts?
I just want to add that, you know, airline personnel are on the receiving end all the time.
Absolutely.
And we've all seen it. We've all witnessed that. It's unfair because sometimes, you know, delays or baggage rules are not under their control. And I think there should be respect and regard for that. And customers, any customers facing executive, stewardess, and you know, honestly, there has to be some protection of them as well. So I won't, I come from the military background, I have huge regard for it, but you know, you can't disrespect anybody. There's a way to deal with all situations. And I think somewhere we need to change the way we talk to people at the service end, you know, whether it's somebody at the bank or at the airline counter.
Can a crisis and how a company and how a brand handles it actually go on to build long-term credibility and equity for the brand? Have there been cases in the past where you feel, we spoke about Maggie, for instance, earlier. It's perhaps one of the greatest comeback stories in corporate history, you know, from zero back to hero, that kind of thing.
All on the backbone of communication is all I would say that, you know. You communicate right, you'll get there. Yes.
And then you have that face, right? You had a leader like Suresh
Mr.
stepping
Narayana,
in,
yeah.
and the company, of course, had that ability and that insight to bring in a person like him. But Lloyd, your thoughts on, you know, how it can eventually, maybe the way you handle a crisis can be a huge win, not just in that situation, but in the future as well.
Oh, absolutely. So I think the way a company and a brand handles a crisis, addresses the core issue and moves forward, and then possibly uses allies, not only can, in a sense, neutralize the impact of that crisis had, the negative impact, I think over time it can build on more credibility. Like they say very often when consumers have a crib and they go to social media, if you can redress it quick enough and for whatever you do, make sure that same consumer posts a positive comment, you're actually moving him up the curve. You're someone who would never write something positive. Now he went and ranted, as we all do. But if you can make good. So I think the idea is, how do you look at every crisis as an opportunity to move forward while addressing the core issues? I think what brands often forget is that the learnings you have when you've come through one, go back and see how a lot of that doesn't repeat itself. I mean, I saw it firsthand in the days of the cola crisis. We recognized that while we were putting out spokesperson and going to TV channels and talking our point of view, a large multinational cola major making sugared water versus a small activist running an organization was always a battle too hard to win, right? And therefore find a kind of more even ground. You're never going to, you know, sit in a TV debate with an activist and kind of come out, you know, smelling of roses. So I think the recognition of how to work these situations to make sure the kind of equations are right. So a lot of the learnings have to be digested. So moving forward, and also working definitively in a manner where you say, how does the brand come out better from this? Not just escape it, but come out better.
Absolutely.
I think I would, apart from Cadbury's, which we're all very familiar, that's another one that's bounced back, right, with Rapper. But, you know, let's look at Nike as an example. But, you know, they decided to sort of back up the NFL player and stayed with it despite a lot of cancel culture against that particular campaign. But because that was core to them and they said, no, we'll stand up for social injustice and we'll do it. And that gained momentum, that helped them with sales if they stay with it. So it's possible for you to bounce back in crises which are irrespective of which is it, you know, product related or communication, culture, advertising related. It's possible. But you have to read the pulse.
Yes.
Sure.
You need to understand what your audience is feeling. In the old days, they would test adverts, right?
Sure.
So why don't they test them enough? And today, it's easier to test it. If a beta version can be shared and get the views in, you'll be able to get, pick out those sensitivities, unless you're doing it in a calculated manner, which some brands do. They say, well, let's put it out. Let's put it out on the weekends. The courts are shut. We're not going to get any stay order on it. Let's run it, and then we'll sort of have.
Yeah, but if I could add one point to what you said, Archana, I'd also say that building trust is a larger organizational issue and something that has to be an ongoing. And brands or businesses that have built trust over time tend to ride over crisis far more smoothly, right? The Mahindras, the Tatas are example. I mean, they're going through rough patches, but you always believe that there's a certain level of trust. And therefore, I think at the core is companies that over time build a high trust quotient, that even when they get into crises where they've obviously messed up, they can still kind of ride it through and come through. I think that's a long-term game that businesses have to recognize.
Like, I don't know if the TCS layoff news qualifies as a crisis at this point in time, but leveraging the Tata brand there, there is that equity, there's that trust that's built up over decades and decades. So you ride that, you leverage that at times like that. But I mean, we could explore a lot more facets of brand crisis.
I would think it's still been very well controlled because they went out with it proactively. See, if you didn't and you had employees actually piping in to say, oh, we've got the pink slip and there's so many of us, rather than the company making the announcement, I think that hurts them more. So that's how you sensitively control. You may not get it 100%, but at least you've taken the spike out of it.
Right.
And that's what you need to do in a proactively for something. Feed the shark before it feeds on you.
I don't know if that's a good note or interesting note to end on, but we'll end on that note. Thank you so much, Lloyd, Archana. Brilliant chatting with you again. Thank you.
Always a pleasure.
No,
Lovely.
thank you.
Enjoyed it. Thank you, Delshad.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.